Hi boys and girls, today's lesson is relating fractions and decimals. All right, so what we have is a number line divided into 10 equal parts. And if on the top we were to start always, a number line starts with 0, and we were writing all the way to 1, but we were doing it by fractional parts, we would say 1/10, 2/10. This indicates 3/10 of the line. This indicates 4/10, 5/10. We keep going. 8 and 9/10. And then this is the whole number 1, or 10/10. And underneath, what we're going to do is label it with the decimals that are related to the fractions. So 1/10 is decimal 1, 2/10 is decimal 2, 3/10 is decimal 3. You can add a 0 in front of the decimal and it is still the exact same number, whether you write the 0 there or not. So for some of you, you're remembering doing this from last day, looking at fractions and decimals. Okay, we will move forward. So now we're going to think back and forth from a decimal to a fraction, or from a fraction to a decimal. And I'll just do a few of these with you. So decimal 8, the fraction for that is 8/10. Remember again, any number that comes after the decimal is in the tenths spot. 7/10, to write it as a decimal, is decimal 7. 3/10 is decimal 3, and decimal 2 is the same as 2/10. And I see one trick question down here. 0.0 is the same as 0/10, which is still equal to 0. And you can write that 0.0. They're all 0, all right? So don't let them trick you with that question. Okay, we'll keep going. All right, so now they're going to see, if you can see this from the screen, I'm not sure, it's pretty small, but what they've done is they've done a decimal line on the bottom that is perfectly correct, and they've done a messed up fractional line on the top, and they've put things where they don't belong. So I'm going to give you an example. At decimal 1, they put 2/10. That is absolutely not correct. That should be 1/10. At decimal 2, they put 1/10, and that is absolutely incorrect. It should be 2/10. And they continue to make silly errors. Decimal 3, they have 7/10. That is not correct. And so if you have a question like that today in your workbook, just check that they are matching the decimal and the fraction accurately, okay? Next slide. Do the decimals equal the fraction again? They just keep practicing that. All right, another way to look at a line is to put it in half and a whole. So if you had a whole piece of licorice, or you cut it in half, that would be quite a long piece of licorice or string. How does that relate to decimals? And so let me show you how that relates to decimals. Of course, again, we start with decimal 1, decimal 2, decimal 3, decimal 4, and wouldn't you know, 1/2, and you may have already known this, is equal to decimal 5. So I'm going to tell you that is the big lesson of the day there, is half is equal to 0.5, or 1/2 is equal to 0.5, or 1/2 is equal to 0.50. Okay, half of a dollar is 50 cents. It's all related. Here, decimal 6, decimal 7, decimal 8, decimal 9, and 1 whole. Okay, so not to forget that 1/2 is the same as decimal 5. Okay, we'll keep going. One other thing we'll examine in terms of fractions and decimals is fifths. So that's the other fraction we'll look at today. So if a string was divided into 5 equal parts, this little bit would be 1/5. This would be 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, and 1 whole, or 5/5. Any number over itself equals to 1, as we know. Again, looking at decimals, decimal 1, decimal 2, decimal 3, decimal 4, decimal 5, decimal 6, decimal 7, decimal 8, decimal 9, and 1 whole, or 1 decimal 0. Interesting. This is something we'll examine in greater detail, and you'll learn more about in some of the higher grades, that 1/5 is the same as decimal 2, or 2/10. 2/5 is equal to decimal 4, or, 2/5 is equal to 4/10. Okay, that's it going ahead a little bit. You don't need to worry about that today, but you will see a number line that's labeled with fifths, and you will get used to putting decimals underneath on a number line. Okay, we'll move on. Actually, we're not going to do the extensions today. If you need an extension after you do your assignment, I will show you the enrichment or extra hard activities to do with this lesson. But for now, go back to DAX and find out what your assignment is for today. Awesome, boys and girls. Have fun.